You guys, I have today Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. This is a little bit different than we usually do. We're not talking about money specifically or how to make more money, but I think this is going to hopefully wrap around for you to help you understand why I have somebody like Dr. Stockwell on our podcast, okay, or on this podcast, because we are all big, well-rounded, all-rounded people, and just making money isn't gonna get us anywhere. We're not gonna be happy at the end of the day if we have, like, 8 zeros on our bank account and the rest of our life is falling apart. So, welcome, Dr. Stockwell. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm really glad to be here and have been looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, Alexandra Stockwell, tell us about you. Why did you get to where you are as far as working with couples and wanting to work with intimacy and help people be better together?
I have a few different answers and I'm going to provide them like a buffet because they
Okay,
all
perfect.
contribute. So, one thing is that my parents were divorced when I was a child. My husband's parents were divorced when he was a child. And this wasn't unconscious what I'm about to share. It was actually conscious that when we got married, we were in love. There was so much promise. I felt very excited about marrying this man and being married to him. And simultaneously, inside my head, I was sure we were going to get divorced.
Mhm.
I hadn't seen it go well personally, and I just really did not know many relationships. None come to mind in this moment, but maybe there were some that were inspiring. There were elements of marriages that were inspiring, but in terms of having an experience that was alive and dynamic and happy and collaborative in this long way with the evolution of the decades, I just didn't picture that. And so, actually, this is before cell phones and recording things in the ways we do now. But when my first child was born, I would pause and imprint the beautiful moments we were having so that in the future, when her father and I were no longer getting along well, I would be able to share how beautiful and collaborative and connected we were when she was a little girl. So
Okay,
that's one piece in this collage.
okay,
Another piece in the collage is my husband and I met the first week of our first year of medical school,
okay.
and we got together within a few months. And the first 10 years of our relationship included medical school, residency training. I had my first child just after my third year of medical school, my second child just before my internship. So, what I mean to convey is that well, medical school was a lot easier for my husband, at least the first 2 years, but I had to work really hard, and then the hours were long, and we had babies in diapers and sleepless nights and the whole situation. And our relationship, though there was a lot of love, as I've described before, was dehydrated. We were very collaborative in making financial decisions, although honestly, since we're on a financial podcast, I was making the decisions. He was immature in his relationship to money when we got married.
Okay,
And logistics, like doing all of the things that our life responsibilities asked of us, we were very collaborative.
okay.
But when it came to romance, intimacy, sex, we were having what I call functional sex, meaning we were doing it, we were each having a good experience, but I didn't feel closer afterward. I felt like it was an extremely untapped reservoir of aliveness and vitality and connection. And I always thought that when we had more time together,
Mhm.
we would have more enjoyment, more pleasure, more fulfillment in being a couple. We were very gratified as a family, but as a couple.
Okay,
Okay, fast forward more or less 10 years. I'm not working any nights or weekends, and he's mostly not working nights and weekends. We do have 4 children, but we had a break where we had no babies in diapers, and things were just much less stressful,
okay.
but nothing really changed in our marriage. And this was a real surprise to me. And when I really had to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't just more time that we needed, it actually was education. Or, yeah, that's the simplest thing. So, trying various things, I eventually did an extremely in depth training in sensuality and sexuality that was for lay people who wanted to improve their relationships as I did. And it doubled as a coach training, and at the time, I didn't know what a coach was. That was not on my radar at all, but I was very interested in pedagogical models and how people would be trained to do something so important and yet private, and so anyway, I went to the teaching lab, and I just felt like I came home. I was so excited, and so much of what I was pursuing as a doctor, I am able to do as an intimacy and relationship coach. First, having really heated up my own marriage and really refined communication. And it's a marriage I feel really proud of. I feel like the quality of the intimacy just grows more and more extraordinary. And so I've been helping other couples do that too. And one of the foundational elements in all of my coaching and trainings and my book and the different things that I offer is the really deep conviction that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill.
Mhm.
And just as someone can grow up knowing very little about how to have a healthy relationship with money, that's my way of putting it, but just not knowing how to collaborate with money, how to make it give to you and not just be something that you accept crumbs, that's a learnable skill clearly, and so is feeling good in your own body and communicating collaboratively and creating a really rich return on the huge investment that life in marriage is.
Oh, thank you. I have a couple questions. So
Okay.
on your first layer of the smorgasbord of the buffet, you said that you thought you would get divorced when you got married. You thought that you had no what when did you change that idea?
That's such a good question, and as you ask it, I was just reminded of the statistics. The divorce rate in the US peaked in the 1980s. And it has slowly been dropping related to the marriage rate decreasing and many other variables. But anyway, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And so I knew that my friends, at least 50% of my friends, like statistically, it was likely. I wasn't arrogant enough to think that I knew differently. And I think probably, I'm not really sure exactly when I first had the thought that I needed to stop assuming that we would get
Okay.
divorced. It might happen, but I had to stop assuming it. And I think it was probably 13 or 15 years in. I've been married
Really?
28 years now that I
Okay.
was like, we're not gonna get divorced. You never know what's gonna happen. Now I feel certain we won't for the
Good.
rest of our lives, but it was more that the evidence was there. Like, I had a good, strong marriage. I needed to get rid of this thought. It wasn't helpful, and it may be damaging.
Were you still in the I'm gonna use your word dehydrated phase of your marriage at that point, or had you started seeing that there are ways to learn how to
You
get
know,
this thing
I
hydrated?
I'm trying to place it. I think actually the important part of this is that in pivoting to really reconnecting or deepening the quality of our connection and heating up the intimacy, in making that pivot, I had already realized, oh, we might not get
This is
divorced.
gonna happen. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't yet have conviction that we would definitely stay married,
Okay.
but I don't think I would have really leaned in. It's vulnerable and kind of uncertain terrain
Yeah.
to get to know myself and express things first to myself and then to my husband that I never would have thought of. That I think the courage to lean in and walk the path towards one another in a whole other way. And let me say, like, we had people who admired our marriage. We
Mhm.
but I wanted to go from good to great. The whole
Yes.
personal growth model, bad to good to great. I wanted good to great in this arena of life that influences everything.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is relevant too when I work with couples. This is definitely not true of all relationship coaches or therapists, but I don't work with couples unless they both are committed to the marriage. Because if someone is halfway out or anticipating leaving, unless the therapy helps, like that diminishes the quality of how deep we can go and how transformational my work can be.
Gotcha. So we want this to work, not I'll stay if this works.
Yes, and actually, this is a terrible image, but it's the one that comes to mind mostly because we're not talking about something that's warlike, but I've always been inspired by the ancient Mongolian warriors who were fierce and very successful in battle, and they fought, the men, of course, with their women and children behind them.
Okay.
Because it's a nomadic population. It's not that the women and children stayed at home and the men went out to fight. The men and women were behind the soldiers. So if the soldiers didn't succeed,
They were getting taken.
everyone, yes. And that is not at all how I think about doing relationships, really to connect and have a truly purposeful, fulfilling relationship. It's a lot of gentleness and not warrior like energy. But there's something in that image that I think
I
was relevant for what we're talking about.
gotcha. I'm gonna back up because you used a word that I don't know the word. Some kind of model.
Oh, did
Hierological?
I say pedagogical models?
That probably is what you said. What does that mean?
Oh, okay. Well, it comes from the Greek word related to teaching. That's not exactly what it means, but so you're used to different business models, right? How
Right?
businesses organize and how they can connect with customers and so forth. Well, in teaching and education, there are different models for how information or experiences are conveyed. So, if we think of math, for example, you can learn the concepts and then get a worksheet to apply it, or you can just start doing problems and in that way learn the concepts. So that would be a pedagogical model. And I said it in the context of thinking about how do you actually teach someone to have what is an internal embodied experience?
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
different than teaching intellectual information.
So I don't most of you guys know if have listened to this at all, I am divorced, got divorced in 2008. The end of our marriage was at a big financial crisis, a big
Yes.
financial when we lost all our properties, that was like, okay, I was done. The done had been coming. It wasn't like that thing ended. And I had 2 daughters, and I felt like a failure in that relationship. And one of my biggest failures, feeling a failure, was I don't know how to show them what this looks like. What does it look like to have a good relationship? And I'm with you in that we could talk and we could do things and we could get things done. It just was not I like the dehydrated. It just felt very dry and functional and not all that other stuff that it's like I wanted alive. I wanted to grow. I wanted to be like your background of just all this. And people would say it, look at me like they thought I was crazy for wanting that. It's like, but surely this is out here. I still don't know how to do it, but I'm happy to know that you are here and can help in the pedagogical model teach us how. Because I agree, it seems like you can't just write it down for me and tell me how to do it because that doesn't it's more of a how you feel it and that wait, let me ask you, how do you work with people? How does it can you give an example of that? And you can use me, I'm happy to share all my whatevers to anybody.
Yes. Okay, I will. And thank you for the invitation. Before I speak directly to your circumstance, I want to share the basic method or paradigm in which I work, which is
Okay.
I develop. The name of my book is Uncompromising Intimacy, and that is the name of my method. And so if you think about the most common relationship advice that is given throughout the Western world, it is to compromise. If you want to be happy in marriage, you have to be good at compromise. Compromise is the way to have things go well. That is just completely wrong. If what you want is a pleasant, dehydrated companionship, compromise is a winning attitude. But if you want something like what the poets describe with the vitality and juiciness that you and I are referencing, compromise makes that impossible. So when I talk about uncompromising intimacy, I don't mean uncompromising in the sense that you should be rigid and always get your own way. I don't mean it like that. What I mean is that when it comes to compromise, what we are doing is withholding what is true, our desires, our challenges, our internal world, withholding that so that our partner is not uncomfortable. So when it comes to really revitalizing and having a really delicious relationship, the key is to bring all of yourself to that relationship and do it in a way that your partner can receive you and ideally share all of him or herself. In other words, if we are basically compartmentalized and closing off aspects of ourselves in our day to day life, as human beings, as mammals, there's no magic switch that when we get to the bedroom, we can just flip it on and be fully expressed and fully present and bring all of who we are in the way that bedroom intimacy requires. There's all kinds of other intimacy, and I'm not diminishing them. They're all essential. And in fact,
Right.
what I'm really fundamentally talking about is a quality of emotional intimacy. So I just wanted to frame the conversation you and I are going to have in terms of your own experiences that it's very much about knowing who you are or being willing to explore who you are and then finding the way to share that because, as every strong woman knows, we can be very concerned about being too much and needing to accommodate and all variations on compromise. So,
Yeah.
anything you want to say in response to that before we go deeper?
I compromise a lot. That's what I'll say. And I don't have a particular intimate relationship right now. And all the things you said about how you compromise yourself so that you don't hurt somebody's, and it's not about not hurting their feelings. It's people, some to me, when somebody tells me I hurt their feelings, like, well, what happened? What did I say? Oh, you just said it too strongly, or that kind of thing. So I carry that into I don't have an intimate relationship now, but if I have an intimate relationship, I carry that to that. And I'm always so very careful of what I say and feel like they don't ever see the real me. Let's put it that way. So,
Right. And if you don't feel seen or you don't feel there's that possibility, then that is not going to create the kind of alive relationship we're talking about. So
yeah.
let's talk about how to do that.
Okay.
So I think tone definitely does matter,
Yeah.
but I think the messaging that is often given that you've articulated is basically that we just need to tone down.
Yes.
I don't think that's it at all. And this is particularly true for high achieving, high performing, intelligent women who do well in the rest of their life as a result of their ambition, their power, their courage, their willingness to say things and take action. I don't think a woman like that ever should need to dial that down in order to have a good relationship. This is, I think, there are a few places where I see incredible relief on my clients' faces. And one of them is when I say to a woman, no, you don't have to become some mousy, feminine. That's not who you are. Like a man who's going to fall in love with you in a really deep way and be collaborative in creating the kind of relationship you would love to experience, that person is going to love your power, your fullness. And so I think the one addition I would express is that sometimes we become intense and powerful, and it's a way to keep someone at bay, to protect
Mhm.
ourselves. And I think the real, actually very exciting, gratifying dance is how to be powerful, how to be just as loud as is your authentic volume. And I mean that like in decibels and also in quality,
Uh-huh.
to do that in a way that feels deeply relational and therefore probably has more vulnerability, but not necessarily less intensity.
Okay.
Does that make sense? It's a little
Yes,
conceptual. Maybe we should make it more practical.
go right ahead. I understand what you're saying, and I'm happy to make it practical.
Okay, well, there are a few ways to make it practical. One really just has to do with turning your attention to how you feel. So, can you picture a man that you find attractive, one you've already dated, one you might like to date, or a theoretical man? It doesn't matter.
Okay, got
Um,
it.
and can you picture being intense? I don't actually find you especially overbearing in this conversation, but whatever it is that you got feedback on, that being that level of intensity while first of all, do you have can you evoke that you have that present in you?
Mhm, mhm.
Okay, simultaneously have some attention on your heart.
I lost you. Have my attention on my
Heart.
heart, okay?
Meaning you're paying attention to what's inside as well as the communication you might be making to this theoretical man outside you.
Okay. Okay.
What do you feel?
I don't know. I don't know if I get that.
Okay, let me try a different way because I
Okay.
want this to be helpful for you and anybody listening. Let's think of something you want to communicate in the strong way. Can you think of something you might be saying in your intensity?
If it so the thing that in my head that's coming to me is I'm tired. I'm tired of being the one responsible for everything. I'm tired of it being on me.
Okay, beautiful. So before you even say that, because that can be said in many different ways. That can be said with blame, that can be
Mhm.
said with criticism, that can be said with arrogance, that can be said with victim energy, that can be said in a lot of different ways.
Okay.
What if you aim to say it in a way that actually is vulnerable? Like it's a gift. You're sharing what your experience is. This is private. This is typically armored. You have the capacity to override it and compartmentalize, but you are choosing. I enjoy this expression, although I have no part of me that's Asian, of opening the kimono.
Okay.
Just like saying that in a way that someone can feel how it is rather than just having it inspire defensiveness or offense.
Okay. I can feel that. I actually calmed down. I feel calmer inside and I'm more at the, "Hey, I am feeling really tired. I'm not sure what to do about it. I feel like, I don't know, I can just say I'm really tired." And that's all I got right now. Now,
Okay, well, I know that this is subtle, but I feel a huge difference in how you said that.
okay.
And the most likely scenario with someone you actually admire is that they respond wanting to be your hero.
Got it.
And the thing I will add in that communication is that if you usually carry everything, like everything, and that's why you're tired, then to the extent you know it, you can set up the conversation for more success by sharing what kind of response you want to have. Because most often when we share, our devoted husbands can think of three things to do. One is to start problem solving. Another is to explain things like, well, this is why you're feeling this way and whatever. And then the third is to just shut down because they don't know what to do and they
Yeah.
don't have the skills and it's very uncomfortable to be in the presence of your discomfort and they just shut down. All three of those options. Problem solving might help a little bit, but not really to
Uh,
contribute to the relationship.
right.
So all three of those options that are the ones that any decent man is going to think of aren't going to work. So if you can think, for example, I want to tell you something and I just want you to hear me. we don't need to change anything. I just want you to know this is true for me. And then say it. You're more likely to set up a win win where you feel better for having said so rather than unseen because one of the other 3 options is taken. And so
Or
I would definitely emphasize that whatever communication you're listening and there's a communication it's time to make to your partner, if it's a communication that's different than the kinds of communications you typically make, set it up as a win-win by sharing what kind of response you want because if it's new, the chances that they're going to get it right are low.
yeah, yep, I got you. So here example, sometimes I have said things in the way that I said it the first time that a little more over the I'm gonna call it over the top, but I don't know. The tone, you talked about tone matters. Once you've put it out there and that they reacted in a way that you would didn't expect, I got a reaction I didn't expect. And
And
even
didn't want.
and didn't want and got that after we could calm down and stop the argument that we started. I was just telling you this, but your tone was, can you how do I back that off? Is it just that you have to have that conversation at that time or is there does that make sense? Or even sometimes I catch is like, oh, that didn't come out right. Just because you can look at the person's face and know like, yeah, you didn't how do you fix that?
Well, one thing is how we think about it to begin with, because again, if you are successful at work and you know how to make things happen and you manage some number of employees and coordinate with vendors and all those things, and I'm trying to convey with my tone that how to make things happen because you're clear and you say it. And if you're not clear, you don't have the kind of success in business that we're talking about.
Right?
So, one of the important things too is that we don't treat our husbands, our lovers, our boyfriends, or girlfriends, whatever, that we don't treat them as employees. And the thing that is normal human behavior is whatever kind of behavior is giving us positive rewards. And for any high achieving woman, we are getting rewards from how we manage people, as I've just mentioned. So, and that's the energy and attitude that we have during our workday. So it's completely understandable that come the evening or the weekend, that is the attitude and tone we adopt, but it's not sexy unless you're in some kinky role play that you both are into. It's not sexy to be treated like an employee. That does not inspire the kind of presence, and in fact, if the communication is, "I'm so tired because 'cause I'm doing everything," and you're talking to him as if he's an employee, there's no context for him to carry that load with you.
Yeah.
And so I think just as one needs to be intentional about goals and then learn how to achieve them when it comes to money,
Mhm.
that same thinking applies in relationship too, but the kinds of goals are not as quantitative, they're more qualitative. So it's
Yes.
less, do you want to be married for 40 years or I don't know what it might be. It's more, how do I want to feel when I wake up in the morning? How do you want to be listened to? How do you want to listen? How do you want to be touched? These are things that the more we can put attention on what we want and then say it in a way that is not demeaning, not like to an employee, but much more collaborative, that makes it more likely to happen.
Is it a good thing so thinking of a recent communication and that didn't go well with the guy. I'm like, I don't know how else I could have said that. Is it asking him? How could I have said that better so that you received it? Is that a good idea? Is that helpful? Is it, or do I need to come to you? We need to come to you to figure out the whole dynamic there or what?
That's a really good question. So I think the answer is yes, and. And it really depends on who that man is, because there are many men who, if you ask that question, how could I have asked you more successfully, who will say, I don't know, just do it better,
Yeah.
which gives you nothing to work with. But if you have a man who can answer that question, or you're not sure, try asking because they may not actually have the most helpful answer, but they'll give you the next steps.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, one of the things that men as a general rule, are hungry for in a way that I think as women it's sometimes hard to appreciate is feeling respected. So, I have 4 children. I have a daughter and 3 sons. And
Okay.
actually, I learned a lot from my sons as well as my husband on this. But even as adolescents, this wasn't true when they were 4 years old, but starting, let's say, at 16, my oldest is currently 26, my oldest son. Starting at 16, as I clued into this, if one of them would be rude to me or dismissive or anything that I wasn't enjoying, I learned to say, did you feel disrespected by what I just said? And pretty much all the time, the answer is yes. And that's why they were then talking to me in this way that I found intolerable. But I didn't actually know. Sometimes I don't think I was being disrespectful, but that doesn't matter. If
How
they
they felt.
felt it, then
Exactly.
I've got to work with that.
Yeah.
And I think the like learning to respect your man or a particular man in the way that they feel respected is a really winning move, although I wanna be very careful, especially for women who are hardworking and tired. I don't wanna put more mental load. I'm not in any way suggesting that a woman needs to figure this out, but if you want this kind of relationship with a particular man or the man you're with, then looking at relationships as a learnable skill and choosing to become a student is a very worthwhile attitude.
Got it. So I'm gonna go back to it's not on the woman because I've talked to other relationship coaches, and to me, it always felt like it was on me. It's like, okay, I need more personal development. I've got to be the one to pay attention. I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I'll just be alone because that's a lot of work. So I heard you say it's not to add to my or our as collective women's plate of things to do. It's a joint thing to do to figure it out together, or how is it?
Okay, well, I'm not speaking specifically to dating, although I
Okay.
will say something about dating first, which is that I think however you develop yourself,
Hmm.
you will then attract someone who's attracted to how you are.
Okay.
So before finding a long term mate, it is worthwhile working on the things that we've been talking about. And
Yes.
in terms of communication and tone, you can practice that with anyone. You can practice that with the person at the checkout person at the grocery store. Like there's always a range of ways to have any conversation. And so the main thing is having more freedom and choice rather than compulsively interacting.
Okay.
And
Ok.
so maybe based on what you said, like, you might pick working on making requests successfully,
Okay.
and I'm a fan of starting small. So maybe you start by asking someone to hold the door for you. Sure, do you want them to just hold it without your asking? Yeah, but you're practicing asking and get it I'm not talking about pretending to be a damsel in distress. That's not my point here at all. But
Yeah.
more that you practice if the waiter at a restaurant brings, I don't know, a particular bottle of wine and says, "Would you like this one?" You could say, "Well, I'd like to see Sauvignon Blanc as well." It really doesn't matter, but you practice making requests because everything improves with repetition.
Mm.
And so, if you use any interaction you're having with family members, strangers, service people, and friends, and just not outrageous requests are fun to make, but that's not what we're talking about. Just like simple requests where you ask, and then when they give it, you graciously receive it. Then it makes whatever your conversation was with this man flow more easily.
Yeah. I have started practicing that, and mostly it's with my luggage. It's when I'm going somewhere, it's like, "Can you help me with this?" Even though, yes, you could pick it up, and yes, it's still difficult, and yes, it'd be nice to have somebody help me. So, when there's a guy standing there, say, "Can you help me put this over the thing?" or whatever, and it always happens. They always do. And you say thank you, and I'm getting much better at actually even when somebody offers, because somebody would offer in the past, a guy would offer to do something, I was like, "No, I got it." Alicia, practice. Say yes and thank you.
I love it. And may I suggest one dial up on this?
Go.
So when it comes to your luggage, you certainly can say, "Can you help me with this?" Like, that's a normal communication. There's nothing wrong with it. But there's something in pivoting from, "Can you help me with this?" to, "I'd love
I
if you would help me with this."
I knew it was coming. Got it. Okay.
Because it's more confronting, it's more uncomfortable to ask for you. Like, "Will you do this for me?" It's a totally different thing to say, "Can you do this?" When it comes to luggage, I don't think there's a big difference, but when it comes to asking an intimate partner for something, their motivation is what you'll enjoy.
Mhm.
And so if you can have your enjoyment be the reason you're asking, just play with it and see what you notice. See if it comes out just as easy, if it's more successful, less successful. It's all research.
Use the word the tell me the words again are, "I would love if you would help me with this."
Yes.
Okay.
Or that's not a precise script, but that's the
Yes.
idea. In
Yep.
other words, it's about you feeling happy, not about their
Um,
capabilities.
gotcha.
So just one other way of phrasing that is, I would be so happy if you could help me move this.
Okay, I'm gonna shift a little bit to couples who work together,
Okay.
whether they're building a business, they've built a business, and they are married or in a intimate relationship together. I see and have heard of a lot of trouble going on there, and figuring out ways to separate those 2 things. Is it good to have them as separate things, or is it just mix it all together and go?
Okay, definitely don't mix it all together and go because the relationship suffers and the business suffers. And it suffers in so many ways. In fact, there's a woman physician who has a practice and her husband is joining her practice in January and I was so happy that they chose to do a retreat with me on this very issue in advance.
Okay.
So there are things to do in advance and things to do once you're already in it. But one of the things that is most important is to be clear what role you're in when you're interacting.
When you're having a
Because,
conversation.
yeah,
Okay.
so one of the ways that this becomes very complicated is if, let's say, a woman is speaking as a wife, coming from that relationship, and her husband responds as a partner in the business,
Mhm.
or vice versa.
Yeah.
So often that gets more mixed than people really appreciate. And it gets mixed when in the business you call one another honey, and then the employees, it depends how many employees you have, that can be very uncomfortable. So let me talk about the problems in the business and then the problems at home. So one of the biggest problems in the business is when other people are in the business, not just the couple,
Uh-huh.
and they might ask, let's say there are two medical assistants, okay? And one medical assistant asks the wife, what order should how should we set up this tray of equipment? And the
Okay.
wife says, "Oh, put the biggest things on the left and the smallest things on the right." And a different medical assistant goes to the husband and says, "How should we organize the instruments?" And he says, "Oh, put the biggest," anyway, the reverse.
Back.
And that basically puts those medical assistants in a very peculiar position. And it's much simpler in the business if it's clear which spouse is top of the org chart for these kinds of things, and then the other spouse is top of the org chart for those kinds of things. Even if they are equally competent in both, it is
Right.
just much more efficient. And there are so many places socially where one spouse can speak for both of them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be true in the business. So I think just really having clarity on roles and communications and decision making, that's one of the biggest challenges in the business itself, in the day to day running. There may be challenges having to do with the vision and the business model and so forth, but I'm not talking about that right now.
Oh,
Just in the day to day, and if you work with your spouse and you have employees, I suggest you pull the employees on whether or not there are any of these issues because they're going to be aware of it much before the couple is, unless there are real problems. So that's
Okay.
one thing. And then when it comes to the relationship itself, as long as you're not like in a studio apartment, I advise no business talk in the bedroom,
Mhm.
because business talk and business mode are incompatible with intimacy and turn on and erotic energy. Like, you don't want erotic energy in your workplace. So if you bring your workplace into your bedroom, it will squelch the erotic energy that otherwise can flourish. So that is one rule. And another one, which again, it depends on the situation and if they're young children and what the schedules are. But ideally, I think no talk about the business after a certain hour. I don't mean 5 p.m., but maybe 9 p.m. or something, so that you can really spend time cultivating the marital relationship, to have conversations that are not about work and not about home-based logistics or children. I think this is true whether you work with your spouse or not, that one of the most important things for a relationship to really be an oasis and a support and a delight is to spend time communicating about things that aren't about the day-to-day responsibilities. And this is where uncompromising intimacy comes up too,
Mm.
because if you don't ask or make room, you don't know what is happening inside that other person unless there's space for them to share it.
Is it true or does it seems to be true to me that women are tend to be easier sharers of emotional things than men. So if you have a guy who doesn't want to or seems to have difficulty even connecting to his emotions, how do you work through that? And how do you get to there? I don't even know. You ask a guy what's going on and he nothing, I'm fine. And when it's clearly there's something going on.
Well, the first thing is to have some understanding, because men, again, these are all generalizations, but men are raised basically by the age of 4. The only generally permissible emotion is anger.
Anger.
And for girls, it's typically fear and sadness.
Hmm.
And so we definitely have more experience. But before even saying more about that, I do want to say that even though that is the typical thing, that men are disconnected from their emotions and women are able to share more, and yeah, there's reality there. When it comes to high performing, highly accomplished women in heteronormative marriages, I do not necessarily find that to be true. Sure, women can have a lot to say, but here's one way that this is reflected: for less education and less socioeconomic success, less entrepreneurial endeavors, I definitely have women reaching out to me more than men.
Okay.
But when it comes to dual physician couples, dual attorney couples, high performing entrepreneurs, whatever, people who are really accomplished and making things happen professionally, it is the men who reach out to me at least as often as the women. And my experience is, if the men are not narcissistic, just really arrogant, selfish people, but they're good men, then they often want more emotional connection
Mhm.
than hardworking, accomplished women are offering. Women who are finding success in making decisions and compartmentalizing and moving on to the next thing. And we're in the workplace trained to ignore our feelings at the higher levels of accomplishment.
Yes.
And it's a really big change to come home and be in our emotional realm in an embodied way. And many women don't make that transition, and their men are yearning to feel their souls more, not necessarily hear more words, but feel their souls more. So I did want to just say that before answering the question as you asked it, which is an important question.
I think that's a good point, and I will use myself as an example. I think I might have had 3 emotions that I could name until about 5 years ago that I felt, and I've grown a lot in being able to name it's like, "What am I feeling?" "Scared." "Okay, but what" get deeper into that, and so I agree with you that we get used to not feeling our emotions because you don't have time to feel your emotions when you're at work, and I agree that many men do want to feel more of us in our feelings than in our brains and our heads, like I have tended to live most of my life, so it's
Well,
a
and it's
scary thing too, to get into your feel it's
it is very scary, and I know you have a broad audience, but particularly for women physicians, it's not only that there isn't time, it's that we specifically, in order to do our work, in order to be professional, we have to put our internal experience aside from standing in the OR for hours and not being able to use the bathroom, like literally put our physical sensations aside, not
yeah,
be able to eat, but also if we're with a patient who is having a really sad experience, diagnosis, whatever it is, we can't just sit down and feel brokenhearted too, even if that's what naturally arises. We literally need to put our own experience aside in order to have good judgment and fully honor the patient's experience. So I just think, particularly for women in medicine, it is a double whammy of disconnection
yeah,
that we need to resolve, I'll say, and feel more fluid. We don't want to completely lose compartmentalization. Then we just don't feel like ourselves anymore. But to be able to thaw sometimes and identifying emotions is actually a very confronting experience.
it is.
When I started doing that, I remember just I would aim every day to take a moment to just check in with how I was feeling, and initially, the only way that I felt was I felt like I wished my house was cleaned up, but that's not a feeling. It
Mhm,
took
mhm,
me
mhm.
some time, and then once I got through those kinds of things that were really just wanting stuff done, the main feeling I felt was tired.
Yeah,
Even if I'd gotten good sleep, I just felt tired, and it was only, like, under those layers of topsoil that I got to, "Oh, I feel really uncomfortable.
mm,
I feel grief. I feel delight." And I think knowing what our internal experience is, being able to share it in an uncompromising way, but also letting those feelings transmit when we make our requests. I'm not talking about to the random
yeah,
helpful man at the airport with your
right,
luggage,
you're
but I
right.
mean to someone over dinner, or when you're sharing about closing on a big deal, to let that joy come through. And when something doesn't go well, to not drown in it, but be really honest about that's how it feels.
Mm,
Back to what you said about the men, I really think calibrating and inviting them to their feelings is the way to help a man get more in touch. It's less of an intellectual endeavor
yeah,
and more of an invitation and modeling.
okay.
You know what? This conversation has gone in a different direction than I anticipated. Is that true for you too?
I don't walk into with an expectation, it's like, "Okay, we're gonna go where we go." I got dogs and stuff over here, I don't know if they're all wanting something from me right now.
Well,
This is
let me
really
just say that the reason that the direction I thought we were going to go is how finances influences relationships, because
okay.
we don't need to, but I just think everything that we've talked about, it's all part of the same thing. So for anyone who talking about finances is challenging, I feel like everything we've talked about actually pertains, even though we didn't directly connect
Giving
the dots.
yes. I was going there when we start talking about business and we're getting into the talking about money, and how does our actual relationship with money, if we have one or think we have one, how does that correlate, if it does, with our relationship with our spouse or partner? Are there things that we could compare? It's like, I'm afraid of money. I'm afraid of this. Like, I love money. I love this. I love money, but I don't know what it does. I don't understand what to do with it. How do those things, or money's not, I never have enough money. Is there any correlation at all in our relationships with money and our relationships with other people as far as,
There is, there definitely is. There's one correlation that I don't feel like I am well informed about, but I've heard and I'll share, which is that when our relationship to money is complicated or not easy, one place to look is your relationship with your father.
okay,
Because I've encountered this theory that they mirror one another. That's not something that I work with or have much more to say, but I think it's very intriguing and it's
interesting.
been true in my life. But I think one of the main places where there is a correlation is as women, we often do not find our ways to adulthood, find ourselves in adulthood able to receive with ease.
Mhm,
And we can work hard, but to actually receive and hold is a very grown up skill. And it is also a very grown up skill for any hardworking, successful woman to learn to receive when it comes to attention and, yeah, just attention from a partner, even down to the way so many women receive compliments. It's
mhm,
like if a man says, "Oh, you look beautiful in that dress." "Oh, I got it on sale."
mhm.
Or just like change the topic or whatever. And so I think if someone gives you a compliment to be able to say thank you and just let that feel good and enjoy the moment before moving on too quickly, that there's a corollary to learning to have the skills and consciousness to receive money without it just going out to the next bill. In fact, when my income started to grow, I literally, when I knew money was coming in, I already knew how it was going to be spent. I'm not talking about putting it in savings or investments, but like which bills it was going to cover.
Uh-huh.
And it was actually uncomfortable for me when I would wait the 3 weeks before the bill was due and just let more money sit in my account. That was a relational exercise that I did on my own with money.
Mhm. Uh-huh, uh-huh. So receiving it, allowing it to be and sit for a second without shoving it out the door. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And the comparable aspect in relationships is to allow a man to put attention or do for you. And like if he gives you a back rub, not to feel like you need to give him a back rub.
Gotcha. What do you think about, we're getting into a little bit of current culture? Do guys compliment anymore? Because I think they're afraid to. I feel like men might be afraid to compliment women for fear of somebody thinking it's sexual harassment or something. You look good in that dress. Why are you looking at me? And just, it feels like there's this
You
tension.
know, that may be true in professional contexts. It should not be true in dating. If a
Okay.
man doesn't compliment, it depends. If it's a first date and you look fantastic and he doesn't say so, that tells you something
That's
about
something.
his attention and how much confidence he himself has.
Mhm.
Confidence being basically the most attractive quality in a man. And I would encourage in the right moment without like a heaviness, but with a lightness and even a flirtatious attitude to say, when you're feeling great, to go to him and say, "Would you like to tell me I look lovely now?" Like you can make it playful without insulting him. "Hey, you should have given me a compliment. I did all this for you." You shouldn't be doing it for him anyway. But the point is, there's a way to invite it if you want more
Yes.
of it.
Yes. I love that. I probably say you should the other one. I have to work on how things come out of my mouth. I really do, because it runs in your head. I say it runs in my head, and then it came out of my mouth. It's like, "Ooh, that's not exactly how I wanted that to sound." And I actually heard it, but I can't suck it back out because those sound waves just won't come back to me, and you
But
already
you
heard it.
can. You like never mind perfection. You always can say, "You know what? I'd love to say that a different way." Would you give me another chance? And just
Okay.
if you notice it as it comes out, you can absolutely do that. And just from what little we've said, I think in addition to how you make requests, that you might have fun playing with eliminating should in non professional conversations.
Okay.
And it's a fun creative process to notice how often it's gonna come out with "you should," and look for the other way to do that, because you were starting to say, "You should give me a compliment." Well, he's more likely to do it and have it feel genuine and you feel gratified if it's like,
If you didn't
"Would
feel
you
like
like to tell me how beautiful I look right now?" You know?
got it. Got it. I can work on that. I took can't out of my vocabulary for almost a year. Almost a year. It's like
Oh,
there's
so that's
no
powerful.
I can do that. I can do that. I love that. Okay. So, is there a sum up of the way and I think the name of your book is the sum up, but I'll let you say it, to have that relationship that is all the things you want it to be. You have your regular work, you have your investments, you have your businesses that you have all your things going on, you have kids, you've got all these things going on in your life. And we often put that person, that special person, that person we want to spend the rest of our lives with on the back because they're always going to be there. They're going to be there. That's taken for granted. How do we get out of that? That's not even where I was going with that question, but how do you get out of that taking them for granted when maybe both of you are even doing it? It's just this is how it is right now.
Well, it is a choice. And I emphasize that it's a choice because with most things in life, if we ignore them or don't really give them the care they need, we get feedback.
Mhm.
If we don't pay bills, we eventually get a notice from collections. If we ignore our children, they become very cranky. Like in work, we get a bad there are all these different things, and when it comes to our intimate relationship, most often, it has the capacity to tolerate a lot of inadequacy until it gets to a breaking point, and
Mhm.
ideally, we don't take advantage of that. If there's a parent who's ill and you just are really involved in something, or there's a big launch for 3 weeks, yes, you wanna ask in advance or thank in advance your partner that you're not gonna really be fully available and have it be temporary, not your usual. So that is a choice. And then the question is, okay, well, if you choose it, how to go about doing it. And it actually doesn't take that much time. So, one kind of conventional guideline is just regular date nights, but I think that is completely inadequate
Mhm.
because it really is about using the time with one another to share who you are and receive who your partner is, and not to look at that time as a time to accomplish anything, but really to be seen and heard and remove the armor that we need to navigate in life. And so, in summing it up, yes, it's uncompromising intimacy, sharing yourself, but the active tool to use really is open ended, open hearted curiosity
Mhm.
about your own experience and about your partners. And if couples made a point of being more curious with one another, that would change so
Mm.
much. And I'll
Mm.
just add that if you think, because you have this to look forward to at some point, if you think of the experience of being in love, of falling in love in the early part of a relationship, so much of that is about being curious. Where did you grow up? What was your third grade teacher's name? Where is that tattoo? When did you get it? If you weren't doing this, what would, like, we just have questions.
Yeah.
And then the relationship becomes stable, settled, comfortable, and we focus on other things. So I know this was not exactly a concise answer, but really, the key is genuine curiosity.
Stay curious. Because I do think we also think we know what that other person's thinking, what I know what you're gonna say if I say that. I know what you're gonna say with that, and that makes perfect sense to me. That makes perfect sense to me. This has been so good, so good. I appreciate it so much. And you work with couples only, yes?
No, I work with individuals.
Individuals too? Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
Partnered and not partnered. My website talks to couples more, but I definitely work with individuals because I've had single women say to me, "I don't wanna wait till I'm in a relationship to learn these skills.
Figure
I
it out.
wanna learn it now." Yes, exactly.
It's like once I'm in it, it's like, yeah, 100%. Perfect. Okay. So how can people reach you?
AlexandraStockwell.com is my
Okay.
website, and from there, I'm on all the social media platforms. I have a podcast also, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, and my book, and all the things, but the best place to start is AlexandraStockwell.com.
What Thank you so much. What does your podcast talk about? What do we talk about there? Or do you have guests or are you talking just out on your own explaining things?
I have guests probably about a third of the time, and the guests it's evolved. I used to interview couples on their relationships and what worked for them, but actually my assistant said, "Well, everyone always says everything is great. There's not a whole lot to listen and learn from that." So I occasionally have couples, but mostly I have experts with a specific expertise that pertains to long term relationships because a lot of the teaching for long term relationships is not the same as people who are dating, but most of it is me sharing really practical tools, ways of thinking about things, stories from my own 28 years of marriage, and sometimes my clients who've given permission. Because really, there aren't enough conversations happening about what goes well and how to make it go well in marriage. And so the Intimate Marriage Podcast is really my contribution to that conversation, which is often missing.
I think I would like to make sure we end with talked about it's a learnable skill. And if you'll just say that one more time, because I think most of us think we're born either knowing how to or not knowing how to. And you saying it, even though I know this, it just is to hear it is so important to me. So I'm going to let you say that last thing.
Having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill.
You guys got it. Thank you so much. And we'll see you guys next week.